This is Real Life with Deb Waterbury, a real show for real people with real issues. And now, here's your host, Dr. Deb Waterbury.
Hello there. Welcome to Real Life with Deb Waterbury. I'm joined today again by my friend. You've met her many times before. This is Brenda Woody.
Hey, Deb.
Hey, Brenda. So we're in the middle of our relationship series. Relationships are integral, I think, in the kingdom of God, mostly because God, when he looked down on Adam and Eve, the only time he ever thought upon his creation wasn't good was when he saw that he was not in relationship with someone else besides himself. So relationship is really important to God. It's important to what we do in the kingdom, and it's important to how we reflect Jesus. So we thought it was really a vital subject matter for us to enter for a season to talk about different relationships. So last week, you recall, we talked with Kristen Tenniswood about blended families, and that's tricky.
Yeah.
I haven't had to deal with that. Jeff and I have been together for 35 years, and I know you haven't had to deal with that.
No, but actually we're in the minority because now, I'm a teacher, and so most of the kids who come from families that are not blended are in the minority.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
Because it didn't used to be, but you're right, we are in the minority. So that was important, and Kristen had some great things to tell us and to share with us about that. So what we want to do over the next 2 weeks, this week we're going to talk to Brenda, mostly because she has daughters, and I have just boys. So Brenda has a daughter, and we're going to talk about relationships with daughters, and really kind of some of the do's and don'ts in healthy relationships with daughters. Next week, we're going to be talking to my friend Hattie Meredith. She is actually from Colorado, but she'll be here visiting, and she's got sons, same as I do. Sorry, I'm going to be yelling at Miles. I mean, not Miles. That's my son. It's in my brain. Levi. And if you're mama, you call your children the dog's name.
Yeah.
He understands that I've just called the dog his name. So nice. I'll be yelling at Levi. But anyway, so Heidi lives in Colorado. She has sons, same as I do. And so she's going to talk next week with me. We'll talk together about relationships with sons. But since I have a daughter-in-law, but she doesn't even live here. She lives in Connecticut. So I've really never, I have a lot of adopted daughters all over the place.
You're a mentor to many young daughters.
But I never, I always get the best part of them.
That's true.
They never come home with me, and I don't have to deal with, I deal with their moodiness, no offense, Alex, but I do sometimes deal with their issues. But that, then I can send them on home. So they don't come home with me. There is a real tricky thing, I think. Having two women in a house is hard. And I know I have had that experience because I lived with my mother-in-law for a year, and I love her. She's passed away, but I love my mother-in-law. But boy, dogs. That was, you put two women in the same house and fireworks go no matter what.
That's true.
And I reckon that probably is also the truth with a daughter, even when she's young, because you have just two females in the same household.
All those little battles over what are we going to wear. The battlegrounds that I dealt with, and I know I should be thanking God that this was the most profound battle that I ever had with my daughter, was usually what are we going to wear or what are we going to eat?
Oh.
Because she was picky about both.
Oh, right.
She didn't have good taste in clothes or good taste in food when she was young. That's my opinion.
It's like every mother I've ever heard.
So I think we're leading right into the first don't. Don't be a know-it-all when it comes to fashion and food, because, those were my little battlegrounds that I picked, and looking back,
put your flag on that hill.
So many tears were shed over those two things.
And probably looking back now, you think, why did I give a flying flip or rolling donut about what she ate right then? She was eating.
Yeah, a flying flip and
a rolling donut.
Yes.
Yeah, everybody who watches the show knows I say that quite often.
Okay.
Brenda, you ought to know that. Anyway, I think that, because even with my boys, the battles that I picked were stupid battles. But I can imagine with another female.
It's that same gender relationship, because I think sometimes what we do is all parents want better for their children than what we had.
Right.
But if we're not careful, that whole ideal can become so divisive.
Right.
Because what we think we want for them can be not what God has for them.
Right.
And so we've got to be so careful that we're not trying to live out our unfulfilled dreams through that lens of our daughters and trying to push them in directions that really isn't where God has them.
No, you're right. And I was just speaking with a young lady about this very thing, and she said something. I'm going to pick Levi out just so he doesn't bother us. She said something very profound, because we were talking about my new book, We Are Mother Abraham, and we were talking about because in it, it features a mother and a daughter.
Right.
And we were talking about our need as moms sometimes, and I think sometimes it even is worse with a daughter, to interfere and think that we're protecting them. When in fact, and she used this word and it was so good, she said, when in fact we're getting in the way of God's destiny for them. And that's really difficult to find the line there, don't you think?
Well, I found a couple of lists of toxic tendencies in mother-daughter relationships, and one of the primary ones that shows up in lots of lists is being controlling.
Oh, really?
And it's masked in this whole ideal of trying to help and protect.
Right.
But really, the enemy's counterfeit of that is, I want to control you, and I want to be a little bit passive-aggressive in helping you to do because I'm spiritually mature. I've prayed for you since before you were born, so I really know what God has for you.
Yes.
Therefore, I'm going to just help you
Right.
by being a little passive-aggressive and trying to manipulate you to do the things that...
Okay, give me an example what that might look like. What might that passive-aggressive manipulation look like in a day-to-day thing? What might that be?
Well, you don't ever want to have big blow-ups. And
Right.
I'm thinking maybe now more, my daughter is, can I say that you're 30, honey? Just did. So she's a very young adult, but I think like in her late 20s, of course, she got married several years back to a guy that I just absolutely adore. But Sundays have always been kind of sacred, those family days that are so precious. But when you're busy and when you've got a life of your own, Sundays don't always work out.
Right.
So, I've probably made a few little passive-aggressive, pouty innuendos to try to...
Get them to come over?
Yeah. When in reality, I don't want my kids to be with me when they are doing it out of obligation.
Right.
And so I've had to really learn to let go of some of those expectations, because life is busy, and so I want the times that we're together to be exactly what they're supposed to be.
Right.
And I don't want ever to put pressure on either of my kids to feel like they've got to check that off their list.
Right, because that's what it becomes. It's mom's going to bug us unless we do that, and then it no longer becomes an act of love. It becomes an act of obligation. And I think also that I know I've had to deal with this with my boys too, is that realizing that now that they're married, or he's married, the other one's engaged, but now that he's married, not to interfere with the traditions that he and she are setting up.
That's right.
By imposing mine.
Yeah.
And that's hard because I don't want to let go of mine.
Right. But relationships are always evolving.
Yes.
And if we belong to the Lord, they're always evolving and they're getting better. They're getting better.
Right.
But we have to be willing to operate in the season we're in and not try to look back and make things the way they used to be, and not try to, control the future.
Right.
It's got to be holistic. It's got to come naturally.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell us another don't. What's another don't that you can think of in terms of having a proper God-honoring relationship with your daughter?
Okay. Well, I think it comes very naturally for most parents to celebrate the successes of their kids, but I think we have to be really careful not to have our kids think that our love or our approval is based on their performance.
Oh, my goodness.
So as much as we want to celebrate the victories of our daughters, we want to also make sure that that is in balance with coming alongside them and nurturing and loving and grieving their losses. Mm-hmm. In fact, I think if we have to put a greater emphasis on one or the other, it would be comforting and nurturing when there's loss, as opposed to over-celebrating their victories, because then they kind of get into this mindset of, well, I don't really want to tell mom that I'm hurting because she worries. And you've got to be able to have that healthy balance of, I'm here, I'm not going to give you a sermon, maybe just a mini sermon, but what I have found is she's more receptive to be very honest, is when she shares a need or a hurt or a disappointment, if I will stop right then and pray for her in that moment. And even if there are friends or other people around, my kids both know, like, don't tell my mom a problem unless you want her to stop and pray for you right there. It might even be in the restaurant, but she will pray for you. And so if we can make our prayer life, because when I pray, I know I can't pray my own agenda. I have to pray God's word.
Right.
Then it helps to be supportive in a way that's healthy and not sermonizing.
Very good. That's good. That's really good. And I think one of the pitfalls, even in my own personal upbringing as a daughter, was that when my parents did tend to just really, my mom, I should say, not so much my dad, but my mom used to just go overboard with all the things that I did right. Then it became for me, this is something I have to do all the time.
Yeah.
And being an overachiever is not bad, but when you become dependent on overachieving so that you get the value and the love that you long for, that's a conditioned response. That's not a natural response. People will tell me often, and matter of fact, I just got accused of being this on a radio interview the other day, as he was talking about the stuff that I do, and he said, "Oh, you sound like an overachiever." And I'm thinking, well, that people will think that's something that you are born with. Well, it's not. I mean, you might be born with with tenacity or whatever, but being an overachiever in the unhealthy way, that's a conditioned response to how you're brought up, and it's much conditioned as a daughter from her mama, because that's the relationship where we akin ourselves.
That's right.
So that's such a great point to make in terms of then allowing our daughters to recognize that failure is more growth, and there's more opportunity for Jesus to be him in your failures.
That's so true.
Than it is in your accomplishments.
Oh, that is so true. And another don't that I think I've been guilty of, and I didn't ever see the impact of it until I saw my daughter as an adult. But I used to be so self-critical in front of both my kids, body image things, all of those negative things that negative self-talk that I would let out of my mouth instead of just keeping it inside. What I think that spoke to her was, well, if mom, because she didn't see any of those things that way, if my mom is this and this and this, and yet she's saying that that's not good enough, and that's not good enough, and that's not good enough, then wow.
What is wrong with me?
Yeah. So I think that's another one of those subtle traps that women in general fall into. And we have to be just so careful.
That is so good.
The self-talk that I engage in here, if I'm not taking it captive, it will eventually come out.
Yes. And that is not productive, and it's so unhealthy for you. But you make such a great point that it's so unhealthy for her, because again, our daughters, our sons, our children, they're born with a clean slate. So those things are conditioned. Body image is a conditioned response. Intelligence, the way you see that, is a conditioned response. Self-value is a conditioned response. And sometimes it's because of the way you speak to them, but more often than not. Most moms will hear of a mom who puts her daughter down and says, "Don't eat that," or "You're too fat," or whatever, and think, "Oh my goodness, I would never say that." And by and large, most mamas wouldn't.
But we'll say it about ourselves.
But we will surely say it about ourselves. We'll surely go, "Oh," and you're right. Your daughter sees beautiful mama, and when beautiful mama says, "I'm too fat," or "I look gross," or "this is," and you're arguing with that, then you're right. That is a deflection onto what they're going to think of themselves. That's such a great point, Brenda, because we do tend to hold ourselves up to that standard of saying, "I will never tell my daughter that she's fat, or that she's ugly, or that she needs to do this," but I will certainly say it about myself.
Yeah,
that's good. That's really, really good. And that's one. And I'll talk about this next week with Hattie too, but I do that, and I think it has been projected even onto my son. So even if you don't have daughters, and just in case you don't tune in next week, it applies to your sons as well.
It goes both ways.
It really does. Daughters are much more, I think, sensitive about body image than sons are. but sons can take that on in terms of a physique and appearance.
And that's even becoming more common with boys.
It is.
I see that in the students that I teach. It used to just, like you said, be girls, but now it's both genders.
Oh yeah, eating disorders are no longer, used to just be girls, but eating disorders now are boys as well.
It's so true, right.
Okay, I think we got time for maybe one more don't. And then we're doing the do's, I think, on the other side of those.
Okay. This wasn't really me, but I see this in some of my friends. I think you can have the dynamic of being either dismissive with your daughter, or you can be too enmeshed in their lives. And I see in my friendships, sometimes it seems to be one extreme or the other.
Yes.
Where there's just a disconnect, or that there's such an enmeshed relationship that it's almost not healthy. Or sometimes in those enmeshed mother-daughter relationships, there's some role reversal. So sometimes moms tend to overshare with their daughters. They make the daughter their sounding board. And I think as you have an adult relationship, you want to be able to be somewhat vulnerable, but there still needs to be in mother-daughter relationships healthy boundaries.
Somebody's the mother and somebody's the daughter.
And I hear people say, oh, my daughter's my best friend, my mom is my best friend. And I wouldn't say that's true about my daughter and me.
Right.
I like to think of her as my friend, but I also think that she's my daughter, and our roles are very mother-daughter. I try to be very careful not to overshare, not to make her my sounding board. In certain areas, I think that's okay. For a time, we were both teachers, so we would share.
Of course, and that's
Like
vocational.
that. But in the area of personal, we've got to just be very mindful and smart about how we set those boundaries.
That is really good, because how often do I see that role reversal, and that almost always starts with there being no filter. No filter between you and this child of yours, this daughter or son, either one, but daughter in particular. So Brenda, what do you think in terms of a lot of moms do want to be friends with their daughters. What do you think that the reason that those filters are necessary? What's the reason behind that? I mean, we understand. I totally get, because eventually there might be role reversal or whatever, but what's the greater reason, do you think, for making sure your daughter understands you are her mother? And that doesn't mean authoritative. That's not what we're trying to say here. There's just a role here that is very important for a child to understand the distinction for. Why is that so important?
Well, I can only go back to my relationship with my mom, who is no longer here. But there were times that she would place way too much responsibility on me, to hear things that I really had no control over. They were grown-up issues. And even when I was a young adult, Mom would put things sort of out there on me that I felt like I almost wish I could unhear some of it. And so I think in terms of having a healthy mother-daughter relationship, we have to realize I've got a Deb to be my sounding board. I have a girlfriend to be my sounding board. But especially when it deals with marriage issues, or when it deals with financial issues, things that they can very easily take on as a burden.
Oh gosh, yes.
We need to set those boundaries there and protect them.
Yes, very good. It is, because it's the responsible. They are your children. And you're commissioned by God to take care of them, and that's both emotionally and physically. And much of that emotional care comes from protecting them from things they shouldn't know about.
And they have no control over anyway.
No, because you start telling a daughter or a son, either one, about the financial issues you're having in your household, then they begin, I know, they will begin to just take it on, and oh my gosh, we're going to be poor and we're not going to have food or whatever. Or if you share with your daughter that your husband's done something you don't like, well, that then reflects on the way they see their own father.
That's right.
And that's it's the same as not wanting to share with your own mom when you're having problems with your husband, because then she's not going to like your husband.
That's right.
That's a whole other show. We won't even go there. But I also wanted to add, as a mom, as any parent, it's like in your marriage. It's the imperfect reflection of your relationship with Christ as in your marriage in the couple as a married person. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Married couple. That's it. But as a parent, it's that imperfect relationship between our Father and us that we are to reflect. So if God were to come down and start sharing with me the way he feels about some of the dumb stuff some of his children are doing, or if he was sharing with me things that I have no control over, God stuff,
what a burden.
I would be so overwhelmed. He would never do that. God is all about caring for me. If you ever notice, what does God share with us? He shares with us his love, his character, the mercy, his grace.
Right.
Those are the things God shares with me. He does not share with me everything else that's going on with everybody else. He shares with me his character, and then I experience that, and then the rest of it is me moving to him and him caring for me. So as a parent, although I'll never be perfect at that, my job and my goal is to reflect that relationship as much as I can.
Yes.
And as a mom with a daughter, you've got so much responsibility because you want her to grow up to be a woman of God.
Yes.
And she can only grow up to be a woman of God if you've reflected God-like characteristics as a parent to her.
That's right.
It's a big responsibility.
It is. But when I think a child sees, I've been vulnerable with you, I've shared this concern, this problem, and instead of you freaking out, instead of you overreacting and trying to fix it, you reflected Christ's love.
Yes.
And you took it to prayer, but you didn't make me feel like, now I've dumped on mom and it's too much for her to handle. Because those relationships, those mother-child, mother-daughter, mother-son relationships, if they're not healthy, kids know that parents are quick to come to a decision or a judgment and jump right to giving advice,
solving the problem,
fixing it, and whether it's a healthy relationship or not, or whether my ideas might be good.
Right.
I've got to be first willing to say, I'm going to pray about that, but I'm going to withhold, at least on the front end, I'm going to withhold my initial response so that I can be more prayerful and really give it to the Lord before I try to, because I'm so good at
of course, me too. And there'll be times that they'll say something that's so boldly wrong and go, no. Because God will do that for us occasionally, but only very seldom. Because think about that, God, very seldom do you bring him something that you immediately go, oh, there's my answer.
Yeah.
Because God will make you go through some things so that you grow to be more like him in relationship with him instead of just following the answer. That's what faith is. Faith is getting into things, because if you stand there and pray for stuff and it just happens, well, there's no faith there. That's and God wants us to grow to that. So again, it's reflecting his parenthood, and it's what we should. Now again, I don't want to make you feel guilty if you're bad at this, because I quite frankly am terrible and have been terrible. I'm better than I used to be. Not as good as I want to be, but I know that I have this is my measuring line. God's my measuring line. And so mama's out there with some girls, from the time they're a baby until the time they grow old and have grandchildren of their own, their great-grandchildren, you're still mama. And I think that there are some sweet relationship opportunities that might be lost if we don't pay attention to the fact that you are mom and this is your precious daughter, and there's much that you can show her about Christ and about being a woman of God simply by the way that you respond to her. Thank you, Brenda. Again, this is difficult stuff. It always is, isn't it? But it's very rewarding, and we just look to Jesus. So God bless you. Hope to see you next week. We'll be talking about boys. Thank you for joining me today on this episode of Real Life with Deb Waterbury. I hope it's been a blessing to you as much as it was to me. If you want any of my books or information on articles or any of my speaking engagements, you can go to my website at debwaterbury.com. God bless you.